That was a very, very insightful presentation, Sanjay. Thank you. We'll move right into our first panel, which is leveraging the SMAC paradigm, the opportunities and challenges. And may I invite all the panel speakers on stage. Sumant Mandal from Clearstone, Mandeep, Cantaloupe Systems. Gentlemen, you can come to the stage here and take your seats. Shawn Douglass of ServiceMesh, Sandip Gupta of NTT Data, and Paul Singh of Expresso Logic. Hi, Shawn.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for the panelists to take time out on a Saturday morning and do this. I was doing another talk across the hall, and I suddenly realized to myself that this is my 10th year at TiEcon. And 10 years ago, I thought I was like a young guy here, and suddenly I feel really, really old. And I was thinking, someone called and said, you have to talk about SMAC. And I said, when I was young, SMAC was a bad word. Like, that's not the stuff you talked about, That was done behind closed doors. But here we are. We're going to talk about what is happening in the infrastructure of technology, how it's sort of being blown apart, and the opportunities both on, for people who want to enter the service layer of it, people who want to build products in it. And we have a panel that is interesting because it's small companies, large companies, consulting companies, entrepreneurs. And I'm going to take, maybe 5 minutes, introduce yourselves to the audience, take a few minutes to talk about what this means to you, and then we'll dig in. How about that? Start with you.
Great. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sandip Gupta. I work for NTT Data, which is the 6th largest system integrator in the world, part of the NTT Group, $132 billion business globally. I run sales and marketing for their cloud business for North America. So in our business, we've grown about 400% last year, and we're seeing tremendous growth because the CIOs are thinking about application modernization and infrastructure transformation. And cloud is in the smack middle of it. So love to talk more about that today.
So Shawn Douglass, I just recently left CSC/ServiceMesh. We were acquired. I was a CTO for ServiceMesh. In my tenure at ServiceMesh, I was responsible for designing and architecting the product, and had the opportunity to work with Fortune 100 companies on their hybrid cloud deployments. And prior to that, I was at EMC Ventures and then in EMC's CTO's office, where I had quite a bit of experience in big data, scale out systems, and analytics. So I don't have the mobile component, but I can talk about the rest.
We'll get you there.
Hi, my name is Paul Singh. I'm the CEO of Expresso Logic. And we provide what in the industry is known as mobile backend as a service for building cloud and mobile apps. And we see a transformation in the industry that is happening where everybody, your customers, your employees, your partners, they all want access to the data. Whether the data is in the database or in some company infrastructure. And in order to provide that data, the normal way is to develop some kind of an application. And that is getting harder because now you are not just dependent on doing that Windows application. You have to do application that works across platform, across devices, and so on, which didn't used to be a problem that the enterprise had to deal with. So as a result, what we keep finding is that only 10% of the applications that customers want ever get built. And so our goal is to sort of automate the process of developing those 90% of the apps which people couldn't justify really developing because of the amount of cost. And that's sort of the core technology we bring to the market. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mandeep Arora. I'm the CEO of Cantaloupe Systems. We provide cloud, mobile, and analytics services to the vending machine industry. So we connect those business owners and back office staff with their vending machines, their drivers, create transparency, and help them decide how to run their business better. And we've definitely seen a change in the last couple of years in a very old school industry. Once people get used to the iPhone and access on the go, a big opening up in terms of their thinking of how they can use those technologies. So no social angle yet, but that's in the plans as well.
All right, so I'm going to kick it off with a question which is high level, and maybe Sandeep and Shawn, you have a perspective, and I'm going to ask you to put your CSC MC hat back on for this. What is the cloud opportunity? What is it?
So if you look at it from a CIO's perspective, 3 years back, the CIO was thinking of cost as a parameter to adopt cloud. If you look at today, it has gone away from cost. It is more about agility. How can it help me compete better? How can I be fast? And how can I deliver a set of applications and services in a cost-effective manner? So cost is becomes secondary. So, but when they think of cloud, they know they have to go to cloud, but they don't know how to get there. And everybody has created some kind of virtual infrastructure, and people start thinking of that as cloud. But it is cloud coming from an application perspective, from an infrastructure perspective. So the CIOs are really thinking how to go from thinking, really taking what applications and infrastructure they have and how to move to the cloud. So the opportunity there for entrepreneurs, in my opinion, is the migration of traditional infrastructure and traditional applications and moving it to the cloud. Whether it is in the form of advisory, whether it is in the form of migration services, whether it is in the form of managing the infrastructure where they're going to move their applications in the cloud. So that's the opportunity that I see for entrepreneurs.
So Shawn, before we answer, I'd love your thoughts on this. Is the opportunity in that domain, and it depends on the maturity of the market, a services opportunity, or is it now ready for product? And you guys had a product company. Where did you find the ease of people paying for product versus the need to educate and services?
It's still fairly early in the market, so we're doing a lot of education. However, the value prop and the customers that did adopt us, and I mean, we were in most of the financial firms on Wall Street.
By the way, just as back 3 months ago?
4 months
ago. 4 months
yeah,
ago,
we closed the
300
acquisition.
some million dollars
Yeah.
acquisition,
300.
great exit.
Right.
I wish I'd invested next time.
Yeah. So, so the core drivers were in agility and competitiveness with smaller corporations that, for example, they've built their whole business on the cloud to begin with. And then you have their traditional software development cycle where an enterprise is trying to compete with a more agile company where their release cycle is maybe 9 months or 6 months or a year. And then you compare that to somebody who's built their business on cloud where they're doing agile, iterative development, they're doing continuous integration, continuous delivery, A/B testing, applying analytics, and saying this works, this doesn't, and just iterating, and they're just out-competing the big companies. And not only are they out-competing the big companies from an agility perspective, but they're also out-competing them on a cost basis perspective of providing the infrastructure, as opposed to deploying a massive capital expenditure to build a platform and then put that in production. What they're doing is saying, hey, we're gonna test this, we're gonna do a little bit, we're gonna...
So it's very flexible. The
it's
framework,
flexible.
the cloud framework, the reason it's cost effective, it's flexible.
Yes.
Now there's obviously, and we'll talk about this, there's challenges in people trusting their data to the cloud, there's
Sure.
differences between private and public and all that stuff. But, maybe Mandeep, you can talk about it as a startup, or you're hardly a startup now, but as a company that's in a slow to change industry, how have you taken advantage of these technologies, and what have you done within your company that sort of fits this theme?
Yeah, well, we've, I think part of it is absolutely that ability to out-execute, right? When you're based in the cloud, we do essentially deliver enterprise-type software. You can just out-execute the competition. But the other thing is when you look at it from a small and medium business perspective, a lot of these companies could go buy the existing tools, but they could never fully implement them because they were customized for larger companies with large IT infrastructure. And so now you can deliver something to these guys that's easier, they don't have the IT overhead, and they can actually leverage it because they don't have to spend all the manpower resources in IT to configure it, keep it running, keep it alive, keep it upgraded. They can actually focus on using it. And as Shawn said, you can continually improve and see, okay, that feature didn't work, it didn't stick, it was too complicated, and you can iterate on that. And so we've seen that as a major advantage. And as I said, when you have these business owners, they're a little skeptical of if my data's in the cloud. But especially these SMB guys, they don't have high-grade IT security. They're very vulnerable themselves. And once you ask them, well, do you do banking on your iPhone? The conversation kind of dissipates and goes away.
So Paul, I don't know your company very well, but if I can presume it's a platform that is in the cloud, and you're offering it as a service to a bunch of people who are building applications on it, mobile being the driving force behind it. Talk about what your customers see and how you engage with them, and how much, and if it's not just startups, because I understand the innovators will always sort of take the newest and the latest and the most cutting edge technologies, because that's how they compete. How are the incumbents, the larger organizations, dealing with it, and how smart are they about it?
So I think, at one level, some of our early customers, for them, they sort of tried the product, used it on the cloud. In fact, the first customer actually wanted to, pay it with a credit card when we really didn't have our Stripe system configured. But pretty soon you find out that, $50 a month kind of service is not going to cut it for you, right? It's good to get some initial reference customers, and then you try to sort of raise your price points to a thing that is sustainable. And therefore, then you start to attract a larger customer set. And the larger customers, as much as we all like to believe that they're all blessed public cloud, they're still in an archaic times, right? I mean, the very first thing, we have a healthcare customer, and they gave us this list of 50 HIPAA requirements that, as a startup, I don't even want to deal with it.
Yeah.
So what do? I said, okay, give you an appliance.
So, back up for a second. You have large customers, and all of you do, 3 of you at least, you're your own customer, for these services. On the customer side, how sophisticated are they technically to understand what they need to deal with? And frankly, it's a ease of sale issue I'm asking, because the flip side to it, if they're too good at it, then they don't need you,
It kind of varies, right? So
Yeah.
You said it yourself. It's a flip side, right? If the customer is too smart, they probably don't even want to use a cloud service. They want to develop their own.
Yeah.
But average customer, the challenges are like, the cloud understanding is not at that level, while virtualization now has reached a level where you don't need to say anything. It's like, okay, give me an OVF, I know what to do with it.
What's the difference between a SaaS company and a cloud company? Just for the audience. I'm curious, what do you think?
So there's different ways of consuming software, right? One way is SaaS, where you're paying by the drink for a functionality that solves one of your business problems. Now, cloud, if you go down from SaaS to PaaS to infrastructure as service where you can put any custom application or an ERP application in the cloud. So that's kind of a little bit different than, business functionality. Here, as a CIO, I'm looking to maybe get more flexible, reduce my costs, but I figure out a way to deliver that service to my end customer, which is a user.
So it's infrastructure.
Right.
Appreciate that, understand. Thank you. We haven't touched on the other aspects of this panel. Cloud, I think, is a fundamental infrastructure thing. How do your customers think of social? How do they think of what they have to do in mobile? And let's just take social for sort of first instance. Outside of saying, I'm going to find a way to outsource my social presence, which is marketing more than anything. What does social mean to your customers?
So I would put social in the category of BPO services. So when I say BPO services, a customer may think, I want to outsource my HR process. So social becomes part of the marketing process. So that's where the aspect of social services come into play.
So do you guys see that?
Well, I mean, it makes me, your question made me think maybe instead of calling this SMAC, it's really CAMS, right? Okay. Because I think cloud, everyone's moving, there's a movement into cloud and across clouds.
Yes.
People are applying analytics to to put telemetry on how they run their operations in business and A/B test and improve their operations. Mobile first is the way people are building applications. SaaS is a delivery mechanism on top of cloud that is default multi-tenant, is the way that people deliver new applications. And if you're an enterprise and you have a legacy, install at your desk application, you need to move to a SaaS model to be able to compete. And then social is the external lens that you need to watch because it's so pervasive and viral that
it's a must-have.
It's a must-have.
It's not just marketing.
Right. So I kind of think it's backwards, right?
Does the CIO understand that in an enterprise? Does the CIO
some
care?
CIOs do.
Is it the CIO's issue?
I think
it is.
It is. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
I would say that
You need to have analytics on that. Right,
You know,
for sure.
We haven't touched analytics yet. but-
customer
It has become
experience.
a CMO issue rather than a CIO issue.
It's a
You know,
CIO.
customer experience and customer engagement is very, very key for a lot of these businesses, and CIOs right in the middle of that.
So Mandeep,
Because-
running your company, do you think of social?
Yeah, we do, and I think that, like as Shawn said it, once you're in the cloud and you have all the other infrastructure and mobile infrastructure, you can start to do really, really interesting things. And we look at it a slightly different angle, right? There's definitely the marketing side of just your social media presence, but there's also what can you do, especially if you're serving a B2C customer. Our customers are B2C, so can you now interact with the consumer beyond just a simple presence? Can you take data from them? Can you take feedback from them and then feed that back into an application? And if you're not in cloud and you have this as a standalone silo, it becomes very, very hard to scale that. But if you can take feedback, for example, in our industry, of what snacks people want to eat, and then feed that back into the logistics, and the cloud enables those possibilities, whereas previously, the amount of work that would require would just be absolutely impossible.
And 6 months before you have the data, before you can make a real decision. That's a retail issue. Okay, what's the difference between analytics and what now, at least in the industry I live in, is called big data? What is analytics? Paul?
I think these are sort of terms designed by marketing folks to confuse the market in general.
There's a new one, by the way, called Max. Did you hear
yeah,
about
I
that?
mean,
Shawn's writing a book on it.
I mean, what's the difference between a big data and a small data? I don't even know that, right?
One's bigger than the other.
Exactly. But, I encounter a lot of startups who will say, I am going to use MongoDB, for example, and you say, why? Do you know how much of a data do you have? I don't have much data, but one day I think I'll be in the big data space, so that's why I want to use it. So my point being, there is a lot of misinformation about this whole market. I mean, very few people have really big data. Let's be clear. I mean, which should qualify to be called a big data. Analytics is something that everybody needs in their business, even as a small company. You have a small website, you really want to find out, okay, I changed from A to B certain thing, did it move the needle or not?
But no question, analytics is required in most every business. It should be. Whether it's done or not, or done right or not, it's a separate question. Has that changed over the last 10 years?
Absolutely.
And what has changed?
Well, I think there is more data available, for sure.
Big data.
Not really big data. It is not necessarily big data.
At some point.
You got it, man. Right after Paul.
I don't think the data is really big, but people think that their data is big.
Essentially, and I love Shawn, you to come in, is if it can't be handled by a database or an instance of a database, people have to use other methods to do it, and that's sort of the catch-all phrase of that is with big data, whether it's speed of data or size of data, whatever that is. But I understand your point. Shawn, you wanted to get in here.
Well, I think that when you say big data, it's not necessarily the volume of the data, it's the mechanism which is stored, retrieved, and accessed.
Correct.
And use the type of data as well.
It's a type of data. So if you're structured in a database, even if you're 100 terabytes, you're not really big data.
Yeah.
You're a database. That's old school.
You got to come up with another acronym like
Yeah.
MAX for big data.
But big data is fundamentally distributed. It's fundamentally, accessed in, via different mechanisms from your application. It may be just an object hitting, a.
Now you're getting too deep.
Yeah.
So
Go ahead.
On the analytics front, what has changed? I think in our industry or the infrastructure industry, we talk about predictive analytics. I think that has changed tremendously over the last 5 years or so, where people are able to make decisions based on what is happening rather than an analyst looking at the data and then making the decision. It is more about the systems telling you what is happening and how do you drive business behavior or consumer behavior based on that data.
I think that's a great point, because you look at companies like there's a startup called Skytree, and they're taking hardcore machine learning and algorithmic stuff that used to be on Wall Street, the quants, and applying it to log data and saying, this is normal, this is anomalous, and therefore
Like, it
there's
helps you.
actionable
It helps.
insight.
Basic idea is it helps you find weak signals and come up with some conclusion.
Right.
Mandeep, you had a point.
Yeah, I have a slightly different viewpoint. I mean, mine might be technically wrong, and it probably is. But to me, big data, it's going to attack different industries in different ways, and some industries aren't going to have that big a volume of data. For me, it's about relative amount of data. Where were you 5 years ago or 10 years ago? And if you have 100x times the data you have, regardless of the volume, you have a big data problem. And that you have to have the analytics there. You have to have the analytics, and they have to be. I think that's the next evolution that's happening. Is how do you have not just analytics, not just dashboards, but predictive, systems reacting, warning you, flagging you, recommending you what to do. Because I think in every industry, just the amount of data that's being collected is so much higher than previous. You can't spare the manpower cycles. You can't get
So
enough out of it.
imagine this, and I think from you, 4 of you would have a good idea of this. You're the CIO of a company. You've spent the last 15 years, you've been around that long, architecting a system that your company runs on, which is built on millions of dollars or tens of millions spent on IBM and Oracle and et cetera, and SAP, or call it whatever you want to call it. And suddenly you have SMAC come smack you, really hard. That's where SMAC works better than Max.
Yeah, I agree.
What should you do? What's your first imperative? What's the way that you actually start absorbing these technologies? And I also want to touch upon, for the audience here, where do you see the sort of white spaces that you've felt as you've gone about doing your businesses are open opportunities for people who want to start companies, whether services or product? Maybe Shawn, I'll start with you.
So I think that what's forcing CIOs, if they're not preemptively seeking cloud and SMAC technologies, there's forcing functions, there's mandates by their their CFO to drive costs down and to change their model from a capital expenditure to monthly recurring costs or what have you, right? Subscription costs. So I think that there's forces in play that require them to reconsider.
So they have no choice.
They have no choice.
Okay.
In order to stay competitive, they have no choice. For example, it's kind of related to the SMAC thing. You look at OpenStack. OpenStack today is in every enterprise that we talk to as ServiceMesh. Maybe not in production, but every single one of them is doing the, geez, this is 75% of what the VMware stack does, and it's free. Geez, that's a hard decision. I'm going to pay for support and services, and
It doesn't work yet.
Yeah, you have to. It's the whole movement from Solaris to Linux in 2001 all over again,
Right.
and it's for private cloud, right? So there's a C in SMAC, right? So
And there's no Red Hat there yet.
right.
Yeah. What do you see, Sandip?
Yeah, so looking at opportunities, I would say as entrepreneurs look at 2 areas. One is, I have Salesforce.com, I have Workday, I have SAP, I have some other application that's running on-prem. Integration across these different silos even is becoming more complicated because a lot of this stuff is not in your control. So integration, either you deliver it as a service or as a product or a combination, that's one opportunity. The other one we were talking about, on the development side of applications, people figured out the agility part by using agile methodology. On the infrastructure side, if you look at it, maybe a Facebook or a Twitter has figured out what they call the DevOps, where the infrastructure is as responsive as your development cycles. But in the enterprise, that's still a big gap between what the app guys are doing and the infrastructure guys are doing. So figure out what they call DevOps or DevOps Plus, and how do you deliver that either as a service or a product to an enterprise? I think that's another opportunity to think about.
Anyone?
I think just to build on what you just said, I think as a startup, when you are providing a SaaS service, you kind of have to get your cloud operations right, which is your infrastructure. And like I said, first time when we were told, okay, I got to provide an appliance, it's like, okay, now I'm in a new business. And the amount of investment that I have to put, in sort of managing private, public cloud, today, it's not a core competency I want to have. Because
Within an enterprise.
Yeah, I mean, no, as a software company.
As a software company.
It is not a core competency I want to own.
Yeah.
I'm more than happy to subcontract it out.
Outsource it, yeah.
But nobody today, at least I talked to 5 companies, and they think of it as a DevOps problem. It's not a DevOps problem. It's an ops problem, what you call plus, plus, plus. And everybody's trying to attack a DevOps problem. It's like, oh, I'll help you do the development. The problem is, in a smaller company, every engineer that comes and starts a new SaaS service, he or she knows the core of DevOps. To get it up to a stage, they all know I can, get a chef and Puppet and whatever else that you're going to tell me as a DevOps operation company. So my point is there is a, sort of a white space there for lots and lots of startups that really want to get into this business of offering SaaS, and there are going to be many more, that where the infrastructure is offered to them almost as a service, where somebody manages how that service works, stays up all the time, and can work across, you can manage this whole transaction across clouds. And that doesn't exist, for sure. Okay. Nobody has delivered it yet. And also the other part that you mentioned on the SaaS service, I mean, I worked on, TiEcon stuff for a number of years. And what happens is every time a new team comes in, we'll get another SaaS service. So now I think TiE has probably 50 SaaS services. None of them talk to each other. There is no integration whatsoever, and nobody has the resources to do it.
Yeah, it's very hard.
And it's a hard problem to solve, but it's a great
problem
white space.
to solve. Yeah. We're almost out of time. It's a very short time for the panel. Mandeep, any last thoughts for the audience that you'd like to leave them with around this space?
Well,
we haven't even touched on mobile, so if you can, that'd be great.
Yeah, I just think around the opportunities, because I focus on SMB, I have a different lens. There's just a huge opportunity in that market that all of these SMAC technologies represent, of migrating the existing infrastructure and improving it orders of magnitude over what they're able to get today. Just getting a mobile workforce, being able to plug in information right on the spot on their iPhone for a lot of these SMBs by itself is a huge transformation. So, each of these, the large problems have been attacked, Salesforce.com and NetSuite, but there's all these verticals with specific products that came out in the 80s and 90s and just haven't been able to iterate very quickly. And there's just massive opportunity across all these different niches for a transformation that
These new
4 out of
technologies.
4, 3 out of 4 of these SMAC technologies can really change things.
Shawn, any thoughts?
I think that right now we're really in a paradigm shift, that the way new applications and new businesses are going to be built are going to be built upon the composition of these services in aggregation, where before you would have to build everything yourself. Mm-hmm. Now as a startup, you focus on what's your core value, and then you, via APIs, integrate and aggregate. And that's totally never been done before.
Yes, very, very flexible.
Yeah.
Now, and for the audience, I'm going to leave you with a couple of thoughts. One, there's 2 sets of opportunities, at least the way I think about it, and correct me if I'm wrong. There's an opportunity for someone to use these technologies, innovate on an existing market, and bring a product to market price performance-wise that the incumbents cannot do. That's the opportunity. Absolutely. As an investor I love, right? Because that's where you go compete, you go tackle a big market, whether it's Salesforce or whoever it is. The other opportunity is to be a product or a service company going after the incumbents and helping them absorb these technologies and become more competitive in their markets. The startups always, I think, underestimate the power of a customer relationship or a Salesforce or a scale or brand and all the other things these incumbents have, which is why they're called incumbents. So those are the 2 basic camps when I see the opportunities in these spaces. Having said that, panelists, thank you very much. They're all here all day, available for you guys. Hound them. They know a lot. That guy just made a lot of money. He's investing. Please find them. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this.